I've been a doctor long enough to know that not all wounds bleed the same. Some are made by blades, and others by the people we love the most. That night began like countless others, quiet, heavy, and tinted by the smell of antiseptic and burnt coffee. It was just past midnight. I had a steaming mug in my hand, walking down the long corridor that led to the ER entrance. Then the doors burst open. He stumbled in, young, no more than 20, pale as a ghost and clutching his side with both hands. His shirt was soaked in blood. His breath came in sharp, shallow bursts, each one trembling with pain. But what froze me was his face. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't begging for help. He was just terrified. The triage nurse reached him first, catching him before he collapsed. I ran toward them, shouting for a trauma room. We got him on the stretcher, his blood pressure crashing as soon as we lifted him. The team moved with trained precision, scissors slicing through his shirt, IV lines going in, oxygen mask pressed to his face. One deep stab wound, left side just beneath the ribs, clean, deliberate, the kind that knows exactly where to aim. As the nurses worked, I leaned closer to his ear. "Can you hear me?" I asked. "Tell me what happened. Who did this to you?" His hand shot out suddenly, grabbing my sleeve with surprising strength. His lips trembled, voice barely audible. "Please don't call the police. For a moment I thought I'd misheard. You were stabbed," I said, trying to sound calm. "We need to know who did this. For your safety and everyone else's." He just shook his head weakly. Then he looked away and whispered, "It was an accident. I fell." I'd heard that line too many times to count, but not like this. His tone wasn't defensive. It was protective. The wound angle told another story. He had defensive scratches on his arm, a bruise on his cheek, signs of a struggle. Someone had done this to him, but whoever it was, he was willing to protect them. We stabilized him with fluids and blood. I performed a quick ultrasound. No internal bleeding. Still, I didn't trust it. We rushed him to CT. I stood beside the radiologist as the images rolled across the screen. The blade had barely missed his spleen by less than a centimeter. One wrong angle and he'd have never made it to the hospital. When we brought him back, he was pale but conscious. I pulled up a chair beside him. "You're safe now," I said quietly. "If someone did this to you, we can help." He shook his head, eyes glassy, jaw trembling. "No police," he whispered again, "please." "I can't talk to them." And that's when medicine collided with morality again. Because in every violent case, the law says we must report. It's not optional. But medicine isn't just law. It's human. He wasn't just a patient. He was a boy. Barely old enough to drink, sitting there bleeding out for someone who clearly didn't deserve his loyalty. I told him softly, "I'm sorry, but I have to make the call. It's my duty to protect you." His shoulders tensed. His face twisted in silent grief. And for a brief second, I wished I could be someone other than his doctor. When I stepped out to make the call, I asked the nurse to stay with him. As I dialed the number, the guilt hit me like a wave. He'd come to us for help, and I was about to do the one thing he begged me not to. But I made the call anyway. The words felt heavier than they should have. They didn't leave my mouth, they fell out of it. Because sometimes duty doesn't feel like the right thing. It just is. I hung up the phone, staring at the blinking light on the wall. It was quiet again. That strange kind of silence that only hospitals have after midnight. The kind that hums beneath your skin. Monitors beeping in distant rooms. Footsteps echoing down hallways that always seem too long. And the faint smell of metal and bleach that clings to your clothes no matter how many times you wash them. 20 minutes later, the officers arrived. 2 men. Plain clothes. Calm, efficient. They looked like people who'd seen too much of this world and learned not to react to any of it. They stood at the front desk, polite but cold, the way only law enforcement can be when they've built walls between their duty and their empathy. I walked up, explaining what had happened, the wound, the story, the silence. One of them nodded slowly. "We just need to talk to him, Doc." I hesitated. "Give me a few minutes first. I need to prepare him." They exchanged a look, then agreed. 5 minutes, one said. "We'll wait outside." I nodded, then turned down the corridor. The closer I got to the trauma room, the slower I walked. Through the glass, I could see him lying there, hooked up to monitors, pale under the fluorescent light, staring blankly at the ceiling. For a moment, I thought about turning around, pretending I didn't see the police, pretending this wasn't happening. But pretending never saves anyone. I stopped at the sink outside the door, ran my hands under the cold water, watching it bead and slide off my skin. Not for hygiene, not for ritual, but to slow my thoughts, to steady the shaking I hadn't noticed until then, because I knew that whatever he was about to tell me wouldn't leave me. When I finally pushed the door open, he turned his head slowly toward me. The panic I'd seen before, that raw animal fear, was gone. In its place was something heavier, like the weight of a truth too big to carry any longer. "Hey," I said softly, stepping closer. "How are you feeling?" He gave a small, humorless laugh. "I'm alive," he muttered. "That's something, right?" He tried to smile, but it crumbled as fast as it came. I pulled up a chair beside him. The room was dim except for the glow of the heart monitor, pulsing green across his face. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then, barely above a whisper, he said it. "It was my girlfriend." The words were quiet, almost gentle, but they landed like a punch. He didn't look at me when he said it. His eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling, glassy with tears that refused to fall. "We fought," he continued. "She lost control. But she's not like that. It's not who she is," he swallowed hard. His throat clicked audibly in the still room. "I shouldn't have said what I said. I pushed her too far. She didn't mean it. It was an accident." I watched him twist the edge of his blanket in his fingers. Over and over, a small, nervous motion that said more than words ever could. I'd seen this before. The bruises, the fear, the shame. But this wasn't just fear. This was love, distorted and hollowed out until it looked like loyalty. "I'd rather lie," he said, his voice trembling now. "Say I fell. Say I did it to myself. Just don't let them take her." He finally turned to look at me then, eyes wide red, desperate. "If they do, she's got no one. I'm all she's got." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't about survival for him. It was about protecting her even if it killed him. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Because there are moments in medicine when words stop working, when logic can't compete with emotion, and this was one of them. I just sat there, letting the silence fill the space between us. The steady rhythm of the monitor, beep, 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 felt louder than ever. I could see his chest rise and fall, slow and uneven, as if the weight of what he was holding inside was suffocating him more than the wound ever could. Finally, I asked quietly, "Do you really love her?" He blinked, caught off guard. It was like I'd asked him something sacred. "Of course I do," he said quickly, almost defensively. "I'd do anything for her?" "Anything," I repeated, keeping my voice low. He nodded. "Anything." There was no hesitation, no doubt. And that's when I saw it, the realization flicker across his face like a light bulb burning out. Because the truth is, when you say you'd do anything for someone, sometimes you already have. I nodded slowly, letting the weight of his words hang between us. The air felt heavier now, thick with everything that hadn't been said. "And would you ever hurt her?" I asked. It was a simple question, but it landed like a strike. He froze. For a moment, I thought he hadn't heard me. But then I saw it. The tiny flicker in his expression, the kind that only lasts a heartbeat, but says everything. His lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. And in that silence, in that one fragile second of truth, he understood exactly what I meant. Because love, real or not, shouldn't leave scars like his. I leaned back, exhaling quietly. There was nothing more to say. Nothing more he was ready to hear. I glanced toward the door. "The police are here," I said softly. "They want to talk to you." His eyes darted toward the window just for a second, as if looking for an escape that wasn't there. Then he straightened his shoulders, wiped the wetness from his eyes, and forced himself into composure. By the time the officers stepped inside, he was someone else entirely, calm, polite, collected. They introduced themselves, their voices clipped but careful. One of them took out a small notepad. "Can you tell us what happened tonight?" The young man looked at me briefly, then down at his hands. His fingers were trembling, but his voice wasn't. "It was an accident," he said, measured and low. My fault. I slipped. The officers exchanged a glance, scribbled something down, and asked again, "No one else was involved?" He shook his head. "No one. They didn't push. No confession, no weapon, no witnesses. Just another quiet story in a world already drowning in them." When they left, the sound of the closing door echoed longer than it should have. I sat beside him again. The room felt colder now, sterile, empty, like even the light had given up. He looked smaller somehow, his body folding in on itself, as if the weight of everything he refused to say was pressing him into the mattress. "You know," I said gently, "this isn't the first time she's hurt you, is it?" He didn't answer, didn't even blink, just stared ahead, his jaw tightening, a muscle twitching near his temple. That silence told me everything. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small folded card. A counseling center, one that handled abuse victims. I'd given out dozens over the years, but this one felt heavier somehow. I placed it on the tray beside his bed. "Just call them," I said quietly. "You don't even have to say your name. Just talk." He stared at it for a long time, then finally reached out and took it. Not because he wanted to, but because he knew I wouldn't stop watching until he did. Then he gave me a small, tired smile, the kind that hides more pain than it shows. "Thanks for patching me up, Doc," he said softly. "Next time I'll be more careful." He said it like a promise. But it sounded more like a warning. When he left, he moved slowly down the hallway, clutching his discharge papers, shoulders hunched under a burden that no bandage could cover. I stood there long after the door closed, listening to the fading echo of his footsteps, and I wondered, had I really helped him? Or had I just sent him back to the same darkness that brought him here? Because in medicine, we learn to fix the body, stitch it, stabilize it, heal it. But the heart? The heart is another story. We don't get to operate on what people refuse to let go of. Weeks passed, then months. And then one night I saw him again. Different injuries, different story, but the same quiet eyes hiding the same truth. He was thinner now, his expression harder. But when our eyes met across the ER, he gave me that same broken half smile. And before I could even say a word, he whispered, "Please don't call the police." That night, I didn't sleep, because sometimes you realize you're not just treating a patient, you're witnessing a slow tragedy in chapters, and every time he walks away, you know how the next one will end. Sometimes, the hardest part of being a doctor isn't saving a life. It's knowing when you can't save someone from themselves. People will endure almost anything, for love, for guilt, or out of fear of being alone. And sometimes the deepest wounds aren't in the flesh, they're in the silence that follows. Have you ever known someone trapped in a situation like this? What would you do if it was someone you cared about? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading. If this story moved you, please hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Because sometimes medicine can heal the body, but not every story has a cure.